was an interesting story about a murder mystery that he solves in the 50s. And so, that interests me from the flying part of it. Uh, other stuff is that I've written. In the Black is it's a catch-22 type book that I wrote because that's my personal favorite book. So I wrote that about the 60s, just being a satire of that because,
I love that. But
yeah,
I really love that idea also, like with aviation, because I've had a love and passion for cars. Like I'm currently in school to be an auto tech. And when you like have something that you know how to do, because like not everybody knows how to fly a plane, let's be real.
right,
Most
right.
people know how to crash a plane. They don't know how to fly a plane. Uh but to be able to like get into that mindset where you could start writing and then you can actually kind of explain things realistically from that
Right.
viewpoint, um that definitely is an upper hand. And like I'm not saying that you have to be an expert, but you can tell when you're reading a story if
Uh,
the person that's writing it actually knows about what they're talking about,
right,
like
right.
as experience. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and that's pretty cool. That's the old joke is I teach takeoffs for free. I'm a flight instructor too, so I teach takeoffs for free, but landings are very expensive. So, but yeah, that's part of it
Mm.
is to get into the nitty gritties of the flying and not to be in an instructional type of thing, but to kind of put it in a context of flying. And then that whole series is the idea is there's 3 books in the series now, and each book is a different adventure in aviation as time goes on. So the first one, he was a movie stunt pilot in the 50s, working with Paul Mance. And the second one, he's actually a mercenary pilot in the Congo during the Civil War in the 60s. And the third one, it focuses on the revival of air racing in the early 60s as it came back from it reached a peak in the Cleveland air shows, through the 40s, and then it died off, and then it came back into the Reno air show. So, like each story is like a little episode of aviation history.
Yeah, people really don't understand. Like when you talk about stunt production, like we're talking about, like even in the 1940s, a lot of these people got severely like crippled. There were some people that came out of that and they'd make a movie and there's like 13 people severely injured and like permanently like can't walk anymore, can't go anywhere. That you got to be a different type of person. You got to be
Uh-huh.
very resilient. You've got to be a very strong type of person to put yourself in those predicaments. You're working with a very strong character from the get-go, right? Like that's the
Right.
idea.
Yeah. 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 And while you're talking about those, I mean, Flight of the Phoenix, that was a movie production. They didn't have CGI or anything like that to create
No,
this stuff, so they
no,
had
no.
had to do it for real. And the end of that whole story is the plane crashed and killed the stunt pilot. So talk about it going beyond being injured.
Yeah,
you
sometimes it
know,
leads to death. It's they don't even make it to the credit sequence because they gone before the credit sequence. Oh my god.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. So,
So you've always you've written adventure stories. You've written about like your own experience with aviation, but
mhm.
you ventured out to like different things to write about as well, like different things that have interested you along the way.
Right, right. Yeah, just and you just get an idea. Like I've got another series. It's a sci-fi series in the near future, 2050, 2060, something like that, where um, you've got humanoid androids that are personal service assistants. And the idea is
Sounds
that,
nice. Yeah.
well, it sounds nice, but uh, in this story, hackers are able to take them over and reprogram them to become hitmen. And then this story follows the police unit that tracks them down and goes after them. So it's like murder,
Wow.
mystery, crime, techno thriller kind of thing. So,
It's the
and
kind
that
of
was
thing
an
that's the kind of book that you stay up late. It's like you
uh-huh.
can't. you can't stop reading because you want to find out what's on the next page. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, and it goes into a whole like the first three books is all about tracking down this one cyberpunk hacker who is really recreating serial killers, through different androids.
It's crazy. I mean, it's not even that far in the future if you think about it. Because the
Oh,
distance from 1980 to now is over 40 years. We're
hmm,
closer to 2060 than we are to 1980.
yeah,
Like, you know, and we have very similar problems like existing now. Like people don't realize this. Like even with automotive vehicles today, onboard computers, they communicate wirelessly.
uh,
You know, you think about that just from one standpoint. Imagine now also people have those technologies in their home. And then you're
right,
talking about a future where not only now it's like not even in appliances, it's like in an actual humanoid droid that you can not only hack, but like program as if like it's a drone program, flying into building. Like this is a soldier you can build. It's just
right.
no feelings, no emotions, nothing.
Well,
It's,
I mean,
it's
if you just look
insane.
at, yeah, well, just look at the news. I mean, look at Tesla. They've come out with that Optimus robot, and they said, is it 2026 or 2028? They expect to go into production and sell it for, I think, $25,000, where you can, get it and have it in your home as just like what I'm talking about.
Hmm.
you
No,
know,
but I honestly I love those type of sci-fi stories because I love fantasy, but when you look at some of the greatest theories and some of the ones that are like more of on the underground scene, what makes them so successful is how they perceive the future. It's like people complain on how Star Trek is like, oh, they don't show any computers. Well, it's because the computers are all baked inside. They don't need to
uh,
have physical little screens and keyboards. The idea of like alien communication being solely through telekinesis, which has been told through stories before, like that is a very real idea. Like the same idea here too is where we look at our future and be like, what if we have that ability where you have not only a different form of human beings, but a new way of totalitarianism and war and havoc that you can like forget about nuclear. Like I get it's a big topic, but like there's that other path of history that we can go down to as well.
right, right. Yeah, and this is this is a obviously a deviation on the whole, you know, robotic thing that they've basically hijacked them to turn them into hitmen, right? So uh, and so once you do that, then you got to follow the logic. Then you got to have cops that can chase them down and go after the robots, go after the hackers, you know, all the way into that. So
It's a deep network. I mean, because if
yeah,
you think about how we advance within technology, you have people in Nigeria, or people in India that live thousands of miles away from the coast of the United States. And they have these complex cyber network where they have contacts in the United States. They have ways of accessing computers and programs. And it's just a matter of time. And it's like being in that environment where you have so many of these obstacles to be able to stop this, you know? Because it's so hard. It's so hard when you think about that as time progresses, we lose less and less of our own security and our safety as a
yeah.
price for advancement of technology.
Right.
That's what it is.
And just I mean, even just think about just like Windows. If there are ways for people in India or wherever their customer service is that can take control of your computer, halfway around the world, and if you allow
It's crazy.
them, yeah, just but so it's pretty much out of control if you let it. If you let it.
It is. I Honestly, like, creating series seems like an easy concept, because something that I've noticed early, like you've already mentioned 2 series that you've worked on, they're built on elements where you have
Mhm.
these really strong characters, these really strong roles, and just progressing the story from there. Sometimes what happens is you create a really great story, right?
Right.
And it's hard to continue from it because it ends at a point where it's kind of over. There's no
Mhm.
really way of continuing it, or it's too abrupt where now it has to be even bigger than what it is before.
Right.
Having that
Yeah.
balance, I think, is. I'm not a writer.
Yeah.
You're the expert in this, but I'm sure it's definitely something that's harder to deal with that type of writing. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I mean, and in I've got 4 books in that series, and the first 3 are pretty well interconnected, in terms of,
Right.
building from, a hacker, you know, murdering a divorcee's husband, from that evolving into a serial killer, and then evolving, you know, to come to a resolution of that. And the nice thing about the first 3 of those is, one thing I did was I started the first book first person from a male detective, right? So
Yeah.
it's the male
Oh,
detective talking,
that's very smart. Okay.
and then the second one I switched to the first person from his former partner, a female detective. So that was first person from her perspective, and then the third one was third person. So that I felt that kind of helped kind of switch things up and move things along and into the end.
That's that. Honestly, first off, like first person is not easy,
Right.
because you have to like focus the whole entire story on like that person's perspective, right? And that shift to now dealing with, a deputy, somebody like again sees the world completely a different way. That is a great way to continue the story. You get that a lot of the times with like psychological thrillers. Well, they'll
Uh-huh.
do that first person, and it's done so elegant, like it's just done so well.
Right.
Like you feel like you're in the seat with that person.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. And it's limiting in a way because it's that person's perspective,
Right.
so
Right.
you, as a
Yeah.
writer, you can't jump in and explain stuff, and that he doesn't know about, because it's
Nope.
all from his point of view. So, and then that was nice, again, switching from a male cop to a female cop, and just that difference was a great jump. So it was a lot of fun.
There's definitely also that element of like almost remorse, because I do feel that when you're dealing with female and male cops, like male cops have to be very like disciplined, very structured, very much in the space. Like female cops have to go through that too as well. But like there's also that almost emotional aspect to it. Because sometimes you have where the female cops are mothers, you know,
Uh-huh.
or they have older kids, or they're just recently relate. Like could be just a lot of different things. But there's that more emotional part to it. And being able to get that through the story also is what's the word? It's capturing. It does. It
Yeah.
captures everything
Yeah.
together.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of difficult to go, to a switch to a female perspective, because they have well, like you said, they have a different orientation, in
Mhm.
their emotions and their reactions, and you know how
How
they
they
perceive
respond to
things.
situations. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, exactly, exactly. So that, that's a challenge, and I thought I did a pretty good job, and I got some feedback from some female beta readers, so helped me out. So, and that worked out.
Sometimes you get inspiration from others. I feel like I write lyrics, and one
Hmm.
thing I've realized with lyrics a lot of the times is when you get caught between a page, you get caught between words. Sometimes you just need to get that inspiration. You know, um, I can't think off the back of my head. I know that there were some writers that the way that they used to be able to write was going on a long walk,
Uh-huh.
or sitting in a coffee, or I don't know, sitting in a room that you're very comfortable with, and just getting into that environment. Maybe if maybe I'm wrong, but sometimes like the story doesn't always come at once. You kind of have to figure out the story as you go through it.
Well, that's that's
Yeah,
exactly
yeah,
that's kind of my approach to things. There are people who outline everything and lay it all out, and I've tried that, and it just
it's
doesn't work
hard.
for me.
It's
Well,
hard.
well, in the Black Book, the Catch 22 book, I had so many characters and I had so many plots going on all at once that I thought, well, geez, I gotta chart all this out and lay it out and figure out what's going to happen here, what's going to happen there, and so I don't know, I spent a long time doing that, and when I got done, I started writing it. None of the characters wanted to do what I wanted them to do, because they got to be real, kind of real people, right? So trying to follow the outline, the characters wanted to go off in different directions, do different things. And I finally just gave up and followed them, let them do what they wanted to do. But you were saying, and that's another thing that uh, taking a long walk. I walk every day, right? And that's a huge uh, bonus for writing because you just get into a groove and you're not thinking about it, but you're thinking about it, right? So it's all percolating underneath as you're walking, and it's a great way to move things forward if you need to.
It helps really balance your mind. I
Hmm.
think a lot of the times we are in situations where we just have so much going on,
Hmm.
and we have a difficult time being able to balance. It's because we're not taking a minute to breathe.
Uh-huh.
You know,
Yeah.
we tend to forget that we are very much biological. We are organic, just like the trees, the grass, and the rivers and lakes. What happens? Like everything around us, we are living things, and being able to connect to nature, just being able to just get out and just, I think it's more important than we think it is. We're just like, I'm just gonna go. No, I think it's really good for your health. Just relax
Oh, yeah.
whenever you can. Yeah.
Well, you're relaxing, you're exercising, you're moving about, you're involved with your environment, just kind of taking it all in, you know. And then I don't know, every time, and I'm not thinking about writing, right? But things are percolating underneath, you know, and sometimes you just need to let it simmer and move along, and then you get an answer for what you need to do for your next plot twist or the next character's action. So
And
that's
the wildest part is the flip side of all of this. You have like one author comes to mind is like Stephen King, where he writes a bunch of books in the 80s and doesn't even remember writing them.
well, yeah. How many books has he written? Holy cow!
Right? Like, and I've spoken to other writers before, and I'm like, have you had this happen before? And I had one writer that told me he had once a book where he wrote and he completely forgot. He didn't remember how he wrote it, what, and I think just what happens sometimes maybe is like, it's not that you're forgetting it. It's like it's still there.
Uh,
It's just you can't access it. Like I think the same thing when you're like writing and it's like you get that writer's block. It's just you got the wrong keys for the door. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah, yeah. I pretty much remember. I mean the details. If I go back and read a book, it's like, oh yeah, now I remember this, now I remember that. I know the basics of it, but a lot of the details kind of slide back because you're going through life and you're moving on, right? So that's a chapter in your life. You've done it, and you're moving on to the next book, or you know, and and it just kind of fades in your memory, just like life events, right?
We don't
So,
know. We
but
don't always
but
remember things. Yeah.
but I don't know if I'd forget all the books I've written. Of course, like I said, how many has Stephen King written? So
I don't know. You know what? Now I'm actually curious. Let me see. How many books has this man actually written? Could I think I remember reading a while ago. Oh God, the guy that started Scientology is considered like the most like has written the most amount of books or something crazy like that. I don't even know how that's like possible, but
wow.
yeah,
So who's that? Is that L. Ron Hubbard? Is that
I
guy
think
for
I think it's
Scientology?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think it's L. Ron Hubbard. Um,
Is he asking Siri?
Now I'm trying to see if this is on 65.
65 books? Yeah, that's a lot of
That's
books.
a lot of books.
That's a ton of books. So,
Jesus.
but
But you know what though? Like it all comes down honestly to the artist, right? Because some artists are incredible and they just write 5 books. Or they can write, like 20 poems and 2 novels or something like that. I don't think it has to do with the quantity of writing. I think what it has to do is with like the quality of what you're making.
right. Yeah.
You represent what you're making. So
Mhm.
you could make 200 books, but they could all be absolute horseshit,
Yeah.
or you could just make 5 and they're absolutely fantastic. You know what I mean? Like there is that balance that comes in between.
Right. Right. Yeah, you gotta. Well, quality is always for me most important. I just can't just churn out genre books. Just churn out the same thing over and over and over again. I'm trying different things, trying different ideas. You know, trying different characters. So yeah,
Experimenting, figuring out
yeah,
figuring out different things. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Uh, so that's another kind of whole thing where people just do genre writing, like romance and horror and things like that, and they just kind of churn out this uh, replications of the previous book. So, uh, it's not too interesting to me. So
No, and a lot of the times it's a good idea to close a chapter on something and try something completely new. You
mhm.
know,
Yeah,
I actually checked up. Okay, you ready for this?
yeah,
Elon Hubbard has a total of 235 works of fiction published.
235.
235.
Holy mackerel!
Yeah. Well, God,
And he created a religion out of it too, right?
I I
Scientology.
I don't want to know what his pill combination was every single morning. I really don't.
Yeah,
It's probably very heavy.
yeah,
But no, but like honestly, like even to that point too is that like when we were talking about even how you've structured and making your series. Um, what's the longest series have you written so far?
well, that the Murder by Munchausen series, which is the Android series, has 4 books in it. Uh, the White Hawk Aviation series has 3. So, and then I've got a bunch of other standalone books that I've done.
Yeah, but I mean, in your own account, right? These series, these stories that you've put work towards, they only needed 3. They only needed 4.
Uh,
You know what I'm saying? Right?
well,
Or they could it honestly, or it could be more. You
yeah, it
know,
could
but
be more.
But in the end of the day, like it doesn't have to be where you had to have made 12 books in order to complete the entire series. That's what I'm
No,
trying to
no.
get at. It's like you don't need to just continue pushing and pushing and pushing. That's why like the idea of trying something else or perceiving another character or trying a different direction might actually be a good thing sometimes.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it's kind of like the stories tell themselves.
They do.
So when you get to when you get done with a story, whether it's 50,000 words or 100,000 words, that's the end of the story. And it's kind of the same thing with the series. Is when you get to the end of the series, you'll kind of know it, and then move on to something different. There's always something to write about, right?
There is. I mean, there's always
Yeah.
something new that I always I always love those stories, like, again, like, pertaining to sci-fi, especially those where you look in the past and they perceive the future very differently on how society saw the future. Because go back 40 years ago, they thought like this is the utopian era. But there were those stories that were completely like, just one coming straight out of my head is like Tron. Tron is like probably one of the earliest stories that I can think of where we have that. It's called virtual reality.
Right.
Nobody was really thinking of virtual reality in those terms back then. Maybe like very hypothetical and very deep conversations, but that is a very thought provoking idea.
Hmm.
Still keeping within the element, you don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
It's fiction, right? It's not
Right.
really based on anything that, but it has that real element to that. There's something about those stories that are fiction, but there's a real element to it where you're like, oh, we have something like that in reality.
Right. Right. Yeah, yeah. E- Even even like Star Wars, it's like it was so far in the future, but it's so grounded in human behavior and activities,
Greed.
and
Yeah.
like greed and the bar scenes, and you know it was so far in the future that it came right back to where we are right now anyway. So, and that's, I think that's an important element to to keep engagement.
It is. And also being able to stay cohesive. You
Yeah.
know, something that happens sometimes is where you get stuck and you don't want to be able to progress. Sticking with the old ideas, the old ways of doing things instead of trying new ways of progressing and trying new things that might be able to help you. Um, it's not necessarily about finding a balance. I really think it's about being able to realize your strengths and what you want to do, right? If
Right.
you want to be a good writer, you can't just sit in that rut. You can't just be that person that doesn't take that leap of faith. Um, because to be honest, like you could make the greatest story in the world, but if it's not coming from you, then where the hell is it coming from?
Right. Right. Yeah. It's got to come from what like we talked about before, but also what you're interested in, and
What you're
you know
passionate about too.
yeah,
You
yeah,
you could
yeah,
see that in the pages.
yeah, yeah. That's what you got to go after, because otherwise it's just again, it's more like kind of rote writing, right? I'm just writing this rotely because these are the tropes in the drama. These are the things I need to write about and have to fit into the genre world. So, and that's successful for some people, but you know, you got to look at the new things. You got to look at things differently if you can. And that's the hardest thing.
It is. You know, I feel when you have life experience and you pour that into your work, I I think people relate to that as well.
Hmm.
I think an idea of like your audience is not necessarily about like fans. It's about people that relate to what you're doing. Because
Right.
any type of artist or any type of, in a way, like you're like your own missionary, even though you're not on like your own path of like Christian faith. Some people are, some people aren't, but it is. It's kind of like you're kind of getting on that horse and kind of riding around, the countryside and finding the people that you can connect with. Um, and I'll be honest, like even in my own life, sometimes the people that you connect with are the people that you interact with every single day. You know, you bump into them and you tell them what you're doing, and they're like, "Oh, can you tell me more?"
Yeah.
And you're like, "Oh, well," and you get a little startled. You're like, "Oh, really?" You're like, "Yeah, I'd love to talk about this." It You just don't realize, but in many ways, you kind of surround yourself sometimes with people that see that artistic journey. They see the storytelling. They want to be inspired. They want to be able to have something different. Like, come on, life is sometimes boring as it is. It's nice to
Yeah.
have a little something interesting going on.
Yeah. Yeah. Take a different tack here, a tack
Yeah,
there, and talk to them about that. Yeah. Yeah. That's, and sometimes you never know who those people are, right? They're just kind of come out of the woodwork at you sometimes, and that's good. It's
like ghosts.
good. So what kind of lyrics did you write? I'm just kind of curious.
So I I started writing lyrics, I think, like 2022. Um I mostly write like for experimental music, and I've kind of used it as a form of therapy.
Uh,
So instead of all of the stuff that's going on in my mind, I take that and I put that down into lyrics. And I've written stories about cars, specific cars
okay.
and how they drive. I've written stories about alien abductions. You
Okay.
know, I try to get very like creative, where I like to paint scenes and characters. That's my
Okay.
thing. Is paint
Yeah.
scenes and characters.
Yeah. So what kind of experimental music is it? Is it
I like to describe it as very 70s and 80s with a twang of 90s. There's a little bit
uh
of rock, grunge, and pop.
okay. So do you play or you create the music yourself
I
or
I play guitar. I don't play
oh
guitar
yeah.
very well, but I'm a self-taught artist where I do all of my music on GarageBand.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes it takes me 2 years to make a song. Sometimes it takes me 3 weeks.
Yeah. Well, I'm a guitar player too, so kicked around in bands for forever. So
People just do not understand that a guitar is not an easy instrument, okay? It's not something that makes your fingers happy,
hmm
okay? Like, you gotta respect guitar players, all right? Because we got bloody fingers. That
Yep.
is a real thing.
Well, it was at first. Hopefully, I'll never give those calluses up. So,
And it's a lot of memory. Like, the,
mhm.
the thing about like guitar playing is like it's not just the chords. You have to remember to be able to remember the percussions, remember moving your fingers around. I I wish I was better, but
We all do. I mean, and you listen to all the great players out there. It's like I'm just always blown away. Barry Carlton, Joe Bonamassa, all these guys. It's
Eric
just like
Clapton, Bob
Clapton,
Dylan,
of course. Oh yeah, yeah. It's just like holy
Jimi
mackerel.
Hendrix. How can we
Yep.
forget?
Yeah, yeah. But yeah. I mean, but that's another great outlet for for doing things. So yeah,
Writing is very much storytelling. I mean, it's told in different forms. It's told through music, it's told through novels, it's told through poems, it's told through many different avenues, like almost different types of voices.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I feel that if you hold yourself back, you were saying this earlier and it's kind of true. It's still in your mind. It's still playing in there, like you can hear it. And as time ke- as time keeps going on, you want to do something with it.
yeah,
So it's
yeah.
driving you crazy. It's in your head. It's like, I got to get this thing out.
Oh yeah. Well, and I think you're right about you know. I think the best lyrics are stories. You know that that really it's kind of a poetic short story. Really, I like those best. Yeah, Springsteen has some good stuff, and just a lot of going down that path. So it's kind of an extension of being a fiction writer, I think.
I think the best I think the best duo, and honestly, I think Paul Simon is the best at this, was Simon and Garfunkel.
Right, right.
They really it's not just folk music. They're stories. They're almost like short stories written in musical format.
Right.
And people think, oh, that's easy. It's not easy. Most artists, even now, cannot do that. It's
Uh-huh.
you're talking about a time before they had digital formats and like Logic Pro and all of these different tools. They had to physically use the tapes, like a tape, and have this giant freaking room. That is incredible.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
that is talent in and itself, and you only get
Uh,
one.
yeah. Well, they can overdub stuff, but it's like it was a whole different world with 2-inch tape,
Was
doing it the
raw.
old-fashioned way.
Yeah, there was no let's rewind and redo that. No, there was no rewind and redo this.
Uh,
The tape has
uh,
already been cut. Like, you want me to retape it back? Like, you got to tell me now, otherwise I'm throwing this out.
so yeah, yeah, it's
Yeah,
it's crazy stuff. But yeah. I mean, Paul Simon has some great lyrics, in a lot of his songs, The Boxer and Mrs. Robinson and all that stuff. So it's like, he's another good one.
America is another one that comes to mind. Which is, it's so strange because a lot of the times when you read, particularly, not even lyrics, when you read even stories from these periods, there's almost a feeling of sorrow, like a feeling of pain. You know, think about, like, To Kill a Mockingbird, which was incredibly popular in the 1950s, 19s. I think came out in late 50s, early 60s. I don't remember what year it came out.
I think it was early '60s,
I
I
think it was
think.
early 60s, like 1960. Just read the story. You see what kind of society people are dealing with. Sometimes books can be almost like a portal to a different time. Like,
Mhm.
almost like, in a way, it's kind of a form of time travel.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's that one, Huckleberry Finn's another, time
Oh, wow.
shifting kind of thing you get
Yeah, be
into,
alive in
and
the 1800s. Woof.
yeah,
Good luck.
yeah, yeah. Or, in Catch 22, that takes you back to the World War II, puts you right there, you
Which
know.
is, yeah, World War II. World War II books are in World War II movies are a whole other story. World War II books are different because World War II books, you got to visualize all that stuff in your mind.
Uh,
And most of us have never been to a battle scene. Most of us have never. So you got to picture all of that. And then somebody came along and was like, let's make war movies.
uh,
So now you actually have, like, some reference in the back of your head, and then you're reading this book, and then, like, this, it's insane. It's
yeah.
just like people actually went through this.
Oh, yeah, like Saving Private Ryan or
Oh my god.
Masters of the Air, from the World War II
Um,
fight, bomber
Inglorious
pilots.
Bastards, which
Yeah.
is hilarious.
But yeah, I mean, you're moving in and out of books, you're time traveling, you know.
And those stories, again, like, they're being, just to imagine being a person alive and experiencing that
Hmm.
is is not only hard, but mentally has so much strain on the person. It's hard to think straight. It's hard to be able to keep yourself, like, stable in certain environments. You get triggered by things. You know,
Right.
you go from a period of war torn terror, bombs being thrown out of you, soldiers trying to shoot at you, and you're sitting there like a good little boy waiting for the doctor, for your appointment, and you hear the ticking of the clock. That it, I can imagine for that person that's traumatizing. It's like, a year ago I was blowing up people, and now I'm sitting in this office waiting for this doctor. Like,
Right. Yeah,
that
that's
it's
what.
crazy.
Yeah, I mean, just think about the beginning of Saving Private Ryan. Where they're storming the beaches. Holy mackerel! That's like, you know just overload on terms of how they dealt with that, got through all that. And then, like you said, that at the end of the war, they're on a ship and sent back home, and going to a regular job, and
It's
it's mind bending,
it
really.
it really is my I had a veteran on this podcast. He fought in Afghanistan,
Okay.
and he said the struggle. And he like, I told him, I told him honestly, like before the podcast, I said I'm gonna be honest with you because like we spoke this before. He had some pretty gruesome stories. We had to like tone it down just a little bit, but I like by the time he was finished by the end of the last story, I said to him, how did you manage in the real life?" And he's like, "To be honest, it was very very hard."
Yeah.
And you find different ways of being able to balance it. Like some people find fitness, Krav Maga, jujitsu. Sometimes people go out to the gun range and they find that way to be able to like. There's different ways people figure out different ways of speaking to different therapists or coaches or different things. But that in itself is a story. It's a real story that actually
Hmm.
happened, and it's so fictional, even though it's real. Like you have
Right.
somebody sitting right in front of you that can tell you the horrors that he saw in 4 years of being somewhere else.
And then how do you integrate that back into your,
I, I,
your regular life?
I know.
Uh, that's, and uh, there are so many different kind of stories like that from, all through the years, World War One, World War Two, Korea, Vietnam. Just, it, it, it's hard to believe that what they went through. So, I mean, I was never in the service, so I didn't see any of that, but it's like incredible, incredible. And then, to come back and integrate into a regular, I don't know, 9 to 5 job. Uh,
Yeah. I mean, but to your point, like there are other stories. It's not just, veterans. I mean, we're talking about, we could talk about aviation pilots, for example, right?
mm,
There was a period where there was a lot of hijacking,
uh-huh,
and there was a lot of planes that were crashing. You know, it's rare, but then you got yourself an aviation pilot that's been traumatized
right,
because they
right,
got to land this plane with 232 passengers. And if they fail, 232 people die because of that. So now they got to reintegrate with society. And it's just, you're right. There's so many different stories like this of people that go through these traumatic experiences and have to like reintegrate to normal life.
uh-huh.
Like it never happened before. Like it's just a ghost in the past.
Yeah, a lot of those guys like Sully from the landing in the Hudson. Just amazing that he pulled it off. And then what was it? I can't remember the captain from the United crash in Iowa. Remember that from uh,
What year was it?
that
Was
was
United? It was United Airlines, right?
yeah, it was a DC-10 that lost the hydraulics, and I can't remember the captain's name, but amazingly brought it in, you know, and then I think about half the people died on the aircraft, but he saved the other half. So, and those guys had
Oh
amazing stories to
yeah.
tell.
Okay. It took place. Sure it was Iowa. It says here it was Airline
Oh,
flight
Sioux City.
232
Yeah, yeah,
two
that's
three
what
two.
yeah, you mentioned that. So it was Sioux City, I think, is where they crashed, right?
Yeah, Sioux City, Iowa.
And you want, and you just think about what they were going through on the plane. Him and his crew, and trying to resolve all the issues, and it's literally life or death. They're in a wounded airplane trying to bring it down safely. So,
I I find it so fascinating, particularly when you're dealing with stories with these types of characters, because it's not just a character, it's a person that has been traumatized, that has been through real life havoc, and has to now navigate life in a somewhat normal setting. And they're always, those people are always perceived as being people that have to cope and manage, and figure out ways of handling like reality.
Uh,
And the thing is, none of us ever want to be that person.
right, right.
That's the thing, right? We never want to be in that situation, but yet we gravitate so heavy to those stories, even though we would never want that to happen to us.
Yeah, no, no. But
Right?
we
Yeah,
want to be looking. We want to be looking over their shoulder and seeing, you know, as if we were that person, and that's.
exactly. Yeah.
But yep, and then and the thing that's most amazing, especially out of World War II, like we were talking about Saving Private Ryan or the Pacific and all that stuff they went through. Those guys came back and pretty much they kept to themselves. They kept that all bottled up as they integrated back into life. So that's uh, it makes you wonder how they slept at night, or if they did sleep at night after everything they had gone through. You know,
It's a different way of being able to cope and handle. I in my own personal experience, meeting somebody that is a Vietnam veteran compared to a World War II veteran
uh,
is like night and day. Yes, the World War II veterans, a lot of them are obviously a lot older,
mhm,
but the ones that I've been around, they're very disciplined, they're very
right.
straight, they're nice, but they stay in pose, they stay in position. Like there's no it's sad. A lot of Vietnam veterans, they're really they're messed up. They have a lot of mental issues, they struggle hard. Like it's hard on a lot of families. you know Again, like what we're talking about is like when you talk even about war predicaments, like from one war to the other, you can see the effects on those people. It's like even as traumatizing it was on D-Day and dealing with the Nazis, it seems like the World War II veterans, they they figured out a way to cope better. I
Yeah,
don't know what it was. Maybe they just bottled up. I don't know. It's just interesting.
yeah, yeah. Well, and not only that, but they came back, and in the 50s, it was like, you know, super productive, super, they just poured themselves into creating a
Work.
better life for themselves,
Yeah.
and then just, moving forward. And that's the main thing. You're always moving forward, you know.
I think that's one important life lesson is to move forward. Even when things get difficult, and again, for some people it's extremely traumatizing situations, you have your whole life ahead of you. You know, you can use that period of your life as way of holding you back and not allowing yourself to achieve more than you can. Or you can say to yourself, wow, I am strong enough that a person I'm standing here now strong,
Mhm.
that I want to be able to push myself forward, that I never have to deal with that situation ever again. It falls in the hands of the person which direction you
Yeah,
want to go.
yeah. That's, but and it's like that, kind of across the board, whether we're dealing with, soldiers and their experiences, or, dealing with writing, it's just like, I got to keep moving forward. Got to move on to the next thing, even if it's in a series, or maybe the series has come to an end, then I got to hop and, look forward and figure out the next thing to work on.
It is. And I I feel that if you spend so much time worrying and not being able to just write or just be able to hear those stories, be able to create those ideas, and literally, if you want to physically put it on a piece of paper, you can. But I've said this before, you are your worst enemy. You get to decide if you, it's like, I fail. Well, did you decide that you wanted to fail? Because sometimes that's how it is that you really don't want this. You really want something else. You know, you want to be able to put your energy towards something you want to do, not something that you don't want to do.
Right, right. So I'm trying. I just read that. I just read a thing about Henry Ford said something about if you think you can do it, you can do it. If you think you can't, you're right again. You know. So it's just kind of like you lock. It's you and how you react that you lock yourself into your own future. So if you think you can't do it, you'll be right.
And it's okay to fail at certain points. Sometimes things don't always work out the way that you want them to.
Mm-hmm.
And that can either frustrate you to the point where you say you give up, or you can figure out a different route. I'll tell you right now, as a person that deals with cars, sometimes that bolt doesn't want to come out. Okay. No matter what you got to do, sometimes you need that mechanic with the smaller fingers. I kid you
Uh-huh.
not. You know, you run into all different types of situations and scenarios, but it's what you create as a writer, what you create as a musician, or what you create as a storyteller, regardless of all those things.
Right. Right. Well, and failure is part of the mix, right? It's you got to try things. Sometimes they don't work out, and you got to move on. But you can't let any single failure, or like Thomas said, how many failures did Thomas Edison have? Thousands and thousands until he invented the phonograph, invented the light bulb, and So you got to take them as they come. Take your lessons, and then, like we're talking about, you got to move on. Keep plowing forward.
I think I think one thing that sometimes gets lost in translation also is being able to allow yourself life. A lot of the times you get soaked and absorbed in what you're passionate, what you're creating. And sometimes you need to be able to connect with the world around you. I found that, I've seen artists that I really deeply care about, but they spend so much of their time working and so much of their time doing what they love and care about, which is great. But a lot of the times, what you end up putting yourself into is where you burn out.
Yeah.
And
Right.
then you got to restart, rejuvenate yourself, get yourself back on your feet. I don't know how many times that's going to work. You know, you got to decide. You got to be able to. And I've said this before. We talked about this before at the very beginning. It's like being able to create that balance. If you don't have
Right.
that balance, good luck.
Yeah. I mean, you can spiral into a hole and just keep digging, and then lose track of everything else that's going on around you. It's like we were talking about, just going for a walk. Just getting out, exercise, and being part of the environment. You gotta be able to achieve that balance. Find other ways of reacting, and then, like for me, the funny thing is when you do that stuff, it pays off. You know, I you know like I said, I'm not thinking about writing. I'm not thinking about solving this character's problems or doing that. But go for a few walks, and pretty soon I got the idea, and like it's just working in the background, churning away, but you know, you're out cruising around. So get that balance going.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, we were talking earlier about this. I had one song, it's called Alleyway. I started writing that song in like 2022. And I never finished it. I started it on my guitar. And I had a friend of mine that we both kind of, she lives in the UK and I was talking with her. And I was talking with her and like just something just snapped in my head. And I got off that phone call and I was able to finish the song that I've been trying to finish for 3 years.
Uh,
You know, the problem was is I wasn't getting out of my head. We're talking about like going out for that walk, maybe just going to the coffee shop or just going for that drive. All you're doing is just getting out of your head. Sometimes not thinking about it, not worrying about it is what you need. It's weird. Our brains are we're getting at is our brains are weird, but that is a way of being able to function, being able to be the best storyteller that you can be.
right, right. Well, there's actually writing stuff down is easy, right?
Oh
But
yeah, very
coming up,
easy.
but
Yeah.
coming up with the right ideas to put down on paper, that's the challenge, and
Mm-hmm.
it like you said, it comes from different places, comes from different folks. You have, people tell you a story about this person and it triggers that to, and then all of a sudden the idea you had finally becomes a real story. You know, I had a I had a story about let's see, it was about uh, took place in liberal Kansas where they trained uh, bomber pilots, and I had a vague idea for years and years and years about putting some story together, and then my girlfriend had knew a woman who was 100 years old, and she read books about everything. And she was actually reading the biography of Keith Richards. She was 100 years old and reading the biography of Keith
Oh
Richards.
my god, that's hilarious.
And then that just snapped things for me with this story. And then all of a sudden it just kind of laid out, that I finally had what I needed to progress. So just from that odd little thing, like you were
That
saying, you
100-year-old
connected.
lady. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
Mm,
she's
that
pretty funny though. So
Oh my god. I mean, you know what though? She seems like a pretty cool 100-year-old lady.
oh yeah, yeah.
You know,
Yeah, she
like
said, yeah, she said, oh, that Keith Richards, he was a good boy. He loved his mom and stuff and stuff. It's just like, it's like, uh,
I wonder if she went through the biography of Iggy Pop. That would
I didn't hear about
uh,
that one, but
I am a little scared to pick it up, to be honest. I
uh,
know what's in there. I don't want to visualize it. That's my problem.
uh-huh.
You know?
Yeah,
Look, I respect a lot of artists. There's some artists that, you know what? I'm just gonna read the book. I don't want to know. I don't want to know anything else. Because
yeah.
sometimes it's just the work that they did that matters. It's like,
Uh,
yeah,
well, it's like
it's okay.
it's like going to a Chinese restaurant. I want to enjoy the food. I don't want to know what's going on in the
I don't want
kitchen,
to know.
right?
I don't want to understand what they're saying in Chinese. Like,
Yeah,
please,
yeah.
no,
No, yeah.
no.
Just bring me my Szechuan and let me enjoy it.
Oh
So
god. Uh,
that's
I I've been meaning to ask because we've been talking about your books the entire episode. Um, you do other things besides writing books, yes?
yeah, yeah. Well, a couple things. I play guitar, and we still jam with some folks twice a week. And do some like you. I do some recording and things like that. And I play out a couple 3 times a month just for fun. So do that. Pilot. Um,
Which is kind of cool. I'm not gonna lie. Yeah.
yeah, oh yeah, it's like the most fun you can have with your clothes on. So
It's like, yeah, I'll be there in 30 minutes. What do you mean? You live like 2 hours away. Yeah, don't worry about
Yeah,
it. I'll be there in 30 minutes.
yeah. That's just it, and
Mm.
it's actually an incredible amount of freedom that you can, go down to the airport, get in a plane, and go anywhere in this country you want to,
And
and it's
these are
just
not like your commercial airline planes, ladies and
no, no,
gentlemen.
no.
No,
Yeah, well, these
these
single
are single
engine,
prop. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, and
Some of them still have carburetors in them, don't they?
what's that?
Some of
Yeah.
them still have carburetors in them,
Oh
don't
yeah,
they?
yeah, yeah. Well, the older Cessnas definitely have carburetors in them. A lot of them are fuel injected now. So
Really? That's crazy.
yeah,
No,
yeah.
because like whenever I think of because whenever I think of single prop, like I think of like that distinct sound. Because they're there's when they're on the ground and they're like hovering, they sound like there's something that's definitely not going to take off. I don't, but they always take off. It's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah, it is. It's incredible, and it's like I said, it's a heck of a lot of fun. Heck of a lot of fun.
Especially like, do you ever do? Okay, I want to be one of those people that ask. You ever do tricks in the planes? You know, like do the loops or the swirls or the turnarounds, or you just a straight flyer?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, just normal maneuvers that you do. Nothing crazy. Done some rolls, but most airplanes aren't really certified for all of that.
No, no, no.
Like
Of course not.
aerobatic or utility service, but it's just fun. You know.
It is. I mean,
Huh?
it's interesting because when you're up in the plane, right, you're looking down. Everything kind of feels like it's almost like a monopoly board.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It does if you're up high enough. But what I would like to do, I lived in Denver, for a while, and what I like to do is I used to just like follow I-70 back and forth at like 200 or 300 feet, just fly along, passing cars like crazy, and just seeing where you are by looking at the road signs, looking at the water towers. It's just, and life is going by you a whole lot faster than when you're up at altitude. So it's just a lot of fun.
It's the it's the little things in life. You know, it's so weird because it's almost where you're having the bird's eye view, eh?
Yeah,
Um, and you're kind of looking down at the world. You know, you're kind of almost in a poetic way. You're kind of playing God. You know, looking down at the humans. Um, but it is interesting because it is something that we've only had for a very short period in our history. I mean, planes have only been around for 120 years,
yeah, yeah,
and just now, like the ability that majority majority of people could afford a plane. You know, like I wouldn't say like everybody could afford a plane, but compared to what it was over 100 years ago, a
yeah.
lot of people could just have that experience. You know, like
Right.
that being able to just soar through the skies, literally.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah,
Yeah.
lots of fun.
Um, MT, I was going to ask you this. I have your website over here. I know that you have your socials. Do you want to give that out to the folks out here?
For
Your website and your socials.
uh, his website is www.mtbass.net, not .com, .net. Um, I'm on Twitter at Owlworks, at OWLWORKS, and on Facebook it's just my author page. It's under that too, Owlworks as well for that. So
What I'm going to do to make it easier, I'm going to put your website and then I'll put your Twitter handle in the description box below.
okay, okay,
Because yeah, and your website, like I told you at the very beginning, is amazing. You can find all of your writings, your books, your interviews. It's like a one-stop shop. It's amazing.
yeah, yeah. Just keep piling them on. We'll put the podcast in there too. So
Awesome. Love that.
yeah,
Well, listen, MT, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. I mean, from what we've talked about, you are an M-depth writer. You fly planes, which is really cool. And again, I really appreciate you coming on and just laying on the writing process, the characters, the series. Whew.
Yeah. Yeah,
Love it.
thanks for having me. It's been great, you know, John, with you talking stuff over. A lot of fun.
My pleasure, my man. Well, listen, to anybody out there, if you want to check out more of the podcast, you can find us at Lost in the Groove Pod. With that, we'll catch you all on the next one.